All right, this is the 3-4-3-5 skill check quiz. I'm just going to go over it. All right, so the first question just asks to match the graph to the name of the graph or the name of the function. This first one is a square function going left to right. This one is the absolute value function. Here we have a constant function. Here we have the identity function. It's also the linear function. Down here is reciprocal function. This is a cube. This is the square root. And I didn't go over this in the class, but I guess this is probably a cube root function. All right, number 2, graph the function, identify 3 points on the graph, f of x equals x squared. So they've given you the x. When x is -1, that just means we take -1 and we square it. Make sure you use parentheses when you're substituting a number in for x. So -1 in parentheses squared is going to give us a y value or a final answer of 1. Remember, y is just the f of x, or what x squared equals. X squared when x is -1 equals 1. When x is 0, 0 squared equals 0, and 1 squared is 1. Good. Now for the graph, hope you can see that. You want to take the parabola, because we know that this is a square function. So we're going to start at the origin 0, 0, and then we're going to use the point 1, 1, and then the other point 1, 1, -1, 1, sorry, save it. Find the function f of x equals the absolute value of x. So we know that the absolute value is going to look like the identity function, or just the x equals y function, which is d, except that it's going to turn right at the origin and start going up as an x becomes more negative, y is going to remain as positive as it is on this side. So it's going to be a V shape, positive V shape. All right, f of negative, okay, so f of x is x squared if x is less than 0, f of x is 3 if x is 0, and then f of x is 2x plus 4 if f is greater than 0. So there is a way to do this in Desmos. One second. All right, so I'll do it with you. When x is less than 0, so we start with a bracket and we say x is less than 0, colon, x squared. Good. So that gives you the graph below 0. It's x squared below 0. We also know that right at 0, it's 3. And then we also know that above 0, sorry, x is greater than 0, it's going to be 2x plus 4. Now it wants to know when f is -3, when f of 0 is 0, and when f is 2. So this is my whole graph except when x is 0. X is 0, they already told us. F of x is 3. Okay, so when we go back to this guy, here it says f of x is 3 if x is 0. That middle, in the 3 rows, the middle row says f of x equals 3 if x equals 3. This f of 0 means when x is 0. So when x is 0, we know that f of x, or y, is equal to 3. So we're just going to leave it like that. And then for the next one is, what is f of -3? I'm going to use this equation that I put in, or this function that I put in, right? Use edit list and find the table. They want to know when f is -3, that means x is negative. F of -3 means x is equal to -3. Our answer is 9. And when it's 2, it's already down here, but you're also welcome to write it in right here. 2, it's 8. So f of -3 is 9, f of 2 is 8. So we can put that in. We said f of -3 is 9 and f of 2 is 8. I think that's the easiest way to do it. You can also just say f of 2 means x is greater than 0. So I'm going to put 2 in for x for the 2x plus 4. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. So you can get that answer algebraically as well. -3 is going to be the x is less than 0. So I'm going to use f of x equals x squared. -3 squared is 9. So you can do it either algebraically or with Desmos. Graph the piecewise function. Again, I would just go into Desmos. And I would say, I'd get rid of this one to not confuse myself. Start with a bracket. It says f of x is -x if x is less than or equal to 2. So I'm going to start with x is less than or equal to 2, colon, f of x is equal to -x. Good. And then if x is greater than 2, f of x equals to 2x plus 1. Good. So it's a little bit hard to tell on Desmos which one does not contain 2, right? But as we go down here, it jumps. You get really close to 2, but when you get all the way to 2, it jumps down to -2. So this is going to be the full circle, and then this is going to be an empty circle in that multiple choice, of those multiple choice options. So it ends here, or we can see on our table that 2 is at -2. So that's at this point, okay? 2 is not over here at 5. 2 is down here at -2. So that's the biggest question once you see the graph. And then our options are new share. Oh, I can just go straight over. Look at me. Our options are, does it look like this? Does it look like this? Does it look like this? Or does it look like this? It looks like those last two, C and D, right? But we just don't know if D is a filled in circle or an empty circle. When you hold down your cursor and run it along that second line, you can't get to 2. And so that means that's a hollowed out circle. All right. Here we have g of x is equal to 3 if x is less than -2, and g of x equals 4 if x is greater than or equal to -2. So you might be able to figure that one out without graphing it. It's 3 if it's less than 2. So up until it's 3 if it's less than -2. So up until -2, but stopping at -2, it's at 3. And then above or equal to -2, it's 4. So that's B, okay? It's not A because the bottom line, y equals 3, stops at -2. So that one should be hollow, the bottom one. It's not C because that would be, it's 3 if x is less than or equal to -2, and it's 4 if x is greater than or equal to -2, but that's not what we have. And then D would be g of x equals 3 if x is less than -2, and g of x equals 4 if x is greater than -2. Find the function that is graphed after the following transformations are applied to the graph of y equals the square root of x in the order listed. So it's a vertical stretch by a factor of 6, shift up 1 unit, shift left 3 units. Make sure you keep the order correct, okay? So we're gonna start with, make sure you have this. I think it's helpful. So we're gonna start with, our parent function is y equals the square root of x, right? The first transformation they ask is vertical stretch by a factor of 6. So it's a vertical stretch by a factor of 6. If you look at your choices in this table, a vertical translation, no. Translation, no. Horizontal, no. Reflection over the x, reflection over the y, no. Vertical stretch. Okay, so vertical stretch of, it doesn't really matter. Stretch and compression are both look the same, okay? So vertical stretch means I'm going to take that amount vertical stretch by 6. So instead of a, I have a 6. I'm going to put that in front of the entire equation, okay? If it was a horizontal stretch or compression, you would just put it right next to the x, but since it's a vertical, you put it outside of the grouping symbols. In this case, the grouping symbol is square root of x, so a vertical stretch means that 6 goes outside the square root. Okay, so that's number 1. Then the second change is a shift up 1 unit. Shift up is going to be a vertical translation up, okay? The red words are really the helpful words here until you get down here. Then it's vertical, horizontal. But we're going up d units, so that means outside the grouping symbol, add d, okay? Translate up d units. So we have our original y equals 6 square root of x, but up 1 unit or up d units means plus d outside the grouping symbol. Do not keep it under the radical. It's outside the radical. If it's under the radical, that's going to be a horizontal shift. Okay, so that's number 2. And then our third change asks us to shift it left 3 units. So you see how each time we're keeping what we had before, y equals 6 square root x plus 1. The plus 1 is outside the grouping symbol of the square root. Left 3 units, sorry. So left 3 units, even though left is in the negative direction on x, left is a plus. Okay, we're moving it in the negative direction horizontally, but we're adding within the grouping symbols. So left 3 units is going to be plus 3. Okay, so horizontal translations do the opposite of what you think they're going to do. So left means add and right means subtract. Vertical, it makes sense. Up means plus, down means minus, but horizontal, left, even though you're going in the negative direction, it means plus, and right, even though you're going in the positive direction, means minus. So that's just something to remember to learn about horizontal translations. So I'm going to say my final answer is f of x or y equals 6 square root x plus 3 plus 1. I'll go ahead and put that in. Y equals 6 square root x plus 3. Just hit the right arrow to get out of the radical, plus 1. All right. Write the function whose graph is the graph of y equals x squared, but shifted to the left 8 units. So I'm going to start with y equals x squared, shifted to the left 8 units. Okay. Where'd it go? Here. Okay, again, for the shifts, look for up, down, left, and right, because they call it translation, but my math lab calls it shift. So shift left 8 units was just like shift left 3 units, even though you're going in the negative direction, you're putting a plus. So it's going to be y equals x plus 8. Remember that it's inside the parentheses. Okay, if it's up and down, it's outside the parentheses. If it's left and right, it's inside the parentheses. So it's going to be this. Okay, if you wrote y equals x squared plus 8, that would be a vertical shift because the 8 is outside the parentheses of the square. So because we kept it inside the parentheses, it's a left shift. See the difference? So it was, just to make sure, y equals x squared, but shifted to the left 8 units. So y equals x plus 8 squared. All right, this one's hard. Find the function that is finally graphed after the following transformations are applied to the graph of y equals x, the square root of x, in the order listed. So the first thing we're going to do is reflect it about the x-axis. Then we're going to shift it down 7 units and then shift right 3 units. So we're going to start with the square root of x. And the first thing we have to do is reflect about the x-axis. The same as reflect over the x-axis. So what does it say to create reflection over the x-axis? To put a negative outside the grouping symbol. So over the y-axis, the negative goes just with the x. For over the x-axis, it goes with the entire equation, okay? So now it's going to be y equals negative square root of x. Good? Two then asks us shift down 7 units. Good. Down units means minus that number outside the grouping symbols. So we had y equals negative square root of x, shifting down, so minus 7. Good. Third step was shift right. Three units. Right 3 units means negative 3 inside the grouping symbols. So y equals negative square root of x minus 3, because right means minus 7. So I'm going to say that this is y equals negative square root of x minus 3 minus 7. All right. Question 10 asks us to graph the following function using the technique of shifting, compressing, stretching, or reflecting. Start with the graph of the basic function shown to the right. Find the domain and range of the function. So the graph that they're giving us is y equals the square root of x, right? And then they are going to put a negative sign in front of the whole graph, right? So a negative outside the grouping symbols means we're reflecting it over the x-axis. So all of our y's, all of our reflection over the x-axis, all of our x values stay the same. All of our y's become negative y's. Good. So on here, all of the y's becoming negative y's means instead of 1, 1, we have 1, negative 1, right? So that graph is going to look like, not A, why did I select A? It's going to look like B, right? Because I just flipped it over the x-axis. What is the domain? Okay, the domain is all x values, right? So it's going to begin and include 0, and it's going to go towards infinity, right? The range are all of the y values. So the y value is going from negative infinity, right? Just on the y, from B, I'm not even looking around. From negative infinity until and including 0. It's not going to go past 0. Do I agree? What did I get? Okay. There is one question. Trying to think. Sometimes it might come up that it it's going to give you y equals the square root of x, and then they're going to say, step 1, shift up 8 units. Okay? In that case, you're gonna want to do y equals the square root of x plus 8, right? And then they're gonna say reflect about x-axis. Reflecting about the x-axis means you take the entire equation and make it negative, okay? So you have y equals, and then the negative sign needs to go outside of everything. Negative square root of x plus 8, okay? So now, even though it said we shifted it up 8 units, if I distribute that minus sign, it's gonna say the negative square root of x minus 8. Which looks wrong, but it's because we had to reflect it about the x-axis, which means the negative got distributed to the square root of x and to the positive 8. And then maybe number 3 is reflect about the y-axis. And reflecting about the y-axis means you just make only the x negative. So your final answer is going to be y equals negative square root of negative x minus 8. So that one can be confusing if they ask you to shift it and then reflect after you shift it, it'll change the positive and negative signs.